Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. We have an update on the tax credit for EVs, and there are some significant changes. So let's review what they're proposing now, but let's start with the big one, as you're not going to believe it. If the EVs are assembled in the US by union factories, there is a $4,500 extra tax credit. Therefore, the big three, GM, Ford and Chrysler, get a $4,500 advantage over Tesla. I think the bill will face opposition from the Republicans in the Senate, but perhaps this is just still a negotiation skill, start with a stupid number and compromise on a lower number later. But either way, it would seem that legacy autos are going to receive a sizable more amount of tax credits than Tesla, at least per vehicle. The rest of the EV credit is pretty much keeping the current $7,500 credit, except with no caps, which means that Tesla will now be eligible again for a tax credit. But there is also an additional $500 tax credit if the EVs use batteries produced in the US, which Tesla does from their Giga Nevada factory with Panasonic, manufacturing the 2170 batteries. However, Tesla are now about to start using LFP batteries in their standard range versions. These are supplied from CATL, which is from China. Therefore, the standard range versions of Tesla will not get an extra $500 credit. Just the long range and performance models will be eligible. This will change within time when Tesla finally starts manufacturing their own LFP batteries in the US, but that will be at least a couple of years away. GM and Ford do have their own battery facilities in development in the US. Stellantis does not currently. Therefore, I would say that GM and Ford will eventually get $12,500 credit, whilst Chrysler does $12,000 and Tesla $8,000 for their long range and performance, and $7,500 for the standard ranges. Chrysler will likely build their own factory eventually. But wait, there's more. And I think this is a big deal. This is for zero-emission vehicles, same as the current EV tax credit. In other words, it does not include hybrids, which is fantastic news. That was going to encourage too much investment and wasted resources into what is a fool's errand. This is great news, not just for Tesla, but the industry as a whole. We do not want to encourage any more ICE vehicles, even if they're hybrid. There is only a $4,000 incentive for EVs with batteries below 40 kilowatt hours too. I think Nissan Leaf might just make the cut there, but it might be close for the $25,000 Tesla Compact. I'd say there's a good chance that it should have over 40 kilowatt hours though, but it won't be far off. But I guess for sure the US version will now either way. This tax credit will last for 5 years. Then, once that expires, well, then the $7,500 incentive lasts for another 5 years, but just for EVs that are made in the US. In other words, Tesla will receive this tax credit for 10 years. That is absolutely insane. Demand for Teslas will be too crazy. Eventually, you'll be able to purchase a Model Y standard range for possibly as low as $35,000. Tesla are not going to mess around. And a standard range Model 3 for low 30s. Oh, and of course the Model 2 at potentially around $17,000 after the credit. How well are these cars going to sell? Tesla will have to make a Model 2 factory in the US within time, but Tesla will also not want to cannibalize their other models by too much either, as they make significantly more profit on every Model Y sale than a Model 2. But the price point is so different, it might be a completely different market. And at the end of the day, Tesla's real mission is to get as many potential robotaxis on the road as soon as possible. Now, these incentives are specific to every type of car too. They only include sedans under $55,000, which means no luck for a Model S. Oh, but no credit for a Lucid either. SUVs under $69,000, again, no Model X, but no Rivian either. Pickups under $74,000, which means all Cybertrucks are included, but not the Rivian. And not all Ford F-150 Lightnings, especially when you start to add the extras on whatever the car dealership wants to add on too. And vans under $54,000, which now gives Tesla a price point to target for theirs. The thing is, the government could give Ford and GM $10,000 more per vehicle that is union made, and it still wouldn't make any difference. It would just create more demand for the legacy EVs, but they were likely not able to make enough cars for this demand in the first place. Legacy autos probably can sell every EV they make anyway. I think because we will see the fall of ICE supply dwindle so much, and there'll be little other choice in buying a new car, especially when you're given this extra incentive, but it would just result in longer waiting lists. Incentivizing battery production, this is a good idea, but $500 is not enough. The battery packs are costing nearly $10,000. This is not a big subsidy. There should have been more incentive to make batteries domestically. But in reality, what will happen when there is this much demand at the local Ford dealership? With people wanting their Ford F-150 Lightnings, the Ford dealers would have ordered wholesale Lightnings. The minimum Lightning most consumers will require will be the XLT, starting at $53,000. But then that's only 230 miles of range. They'll want the range boost for an extra $10,000, taking it to $63,000, and then probably a few other extras like the touchscreen. Before long, the actual price is not far off $70,000. But there's so much demand for this car, then the car dealerships want to add on a bit of a premium, except they can only add on a maximum of $4,000, otherwise it goes over the threshold of the tax credit. The government have not factored in the greedy car dealers. So we need to work back from there. To be honest, it sounds like the car dealers will have no problem adding on $15,000 premium, meaning that they need a retail price of $59,000 for a Ford F-150 Lightning, which when you include all the other costs of buying a car, like delivery and on-road charges, well, it's only going to be valid for the most basic version of the F-150 Lightning, excluding the $40,000 commercial version. So the only Ford Lightning that will be available likely will have cloth seats, no touchscreen, only 230 miles of range, no FSD, if you can even call it that. It will be incredibly basic, especially when compared to a Cybertruck. If you want a Ford F-150 Lightning with a higher spec, then you'd have to pay a fortune, and then there'd be no tax credit for it at all, unless you go on a very long waiting list. In fact, if the car dealerships do what is most profitable for them, they'll just purchase the most basic versions, and then they can add as much of a premium on as possible to keep them under the tax incentive. Therefore, this will mean that legacy EVs are not just so much more standard and basic than Teslas, even when fully optioned, but it would be most profitable for the car dealers to only offer the most basic versions of them in the first place. Minimal range, no touchscreen, etc. And if you want these extras and pay actual retail price so you can come under the tax credit threshold, then you would have to join a 1-year waiting list or so. Maybe even longer than a waiting list for a Tesla, due to Tesla having significantly more supply. So who's benefiting from all this? Well, the car dealers will probably absorb as much of the credit as they can. The legacy automakers can't really raise their prices much, or else they'll go over the cap for their vehicles. They'll have enough demand for their EVs though, which doesn't necessarily help them if they still lose money on every EV they make. However, as for Tesla, well, an $8,000 credit may not be as good as $10,000, but there are no hybrids to compete with. Oh yeah, and this lasts for 10 years. Tesla's demand will be absolutely insane in the US. Tesla will have to double down in the US. I foresee a new factory in the Northeast, which Elon has mentioned in the past, and a Model 2 factory in Texas must be quite likely. It would be absurd not to take advantage of this opportunity. I'm actually uncertain as to how this really benefits the legacy autos in any way. This will make Tesla's market share increase that much faster in the US, which means legacy ICE business will dwindle that much faster, particularly when their EVs osborne their ICE cars, which means legacy will have to downsize that much sooner, and more jobs will be lost earlier, which means less ICE cars will be for sale, and eventually legacy will only have their EV business and parts business left of any value, aside from all the previously financed ICE cars that are still collecting finance payments. But the ICE factories will not survive for long, hopefully freeing up more components for Tesla. There was very little the government could ever do to help legacy without benefiting Tesla more. Even a $4,500 discrepancy doesn't do enough for them. The government claim this will cost $33 to $34 billion over a decade, which is an absurd amount, but they haven't done their math very well. Within 5 years' time, Tesla could have sold perhaps 10 million more vehicles in the US. Well, 10 million times 8,000, that comes to $80 billion. And that is just what Tesla do. And there are another 5 years after that where Tesla could have ramped up production significantly more at a guess probably 30 million or so, or another $240 billion in tax credits. Or perhaps the government are clueless as to how much Tesla are able to ramp up, which is why Tesla likely sandbag. I couldn't see anything mentioned about Chinese EVs, but I imagine this will exclude them, as government are going to use protectionism against Chinese EVs, as they are the biggest threat to Ford and GM. Well, Tesla is obviously, but there's no stopping Tesla. They can, however, stop the Chinese quite easily. With 25% import tariffs and a $12,500 local tax incentive, it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese to compete in the US, and will most likely try and find other easier markets. Anyway, I'm not sure if they'll even get away with the $4,500 for the unions, but like I say, if you're looking to buy a Tesla, buy it now before it's too late and the waiting list becomes too long. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.